Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the incredibly, wonderfully, sometimes horrifyingly boring secrets of the Qing Dynasty. Now, when you hear secrets, your mind probably conjures up images of clandestine meetings and shadowy chambers, whispers of poison and betrayal, maybe even a hidden treasure map or two. And while the Qing certainly had its fair share of intrigue, enough to make your average Netflix historical drama look like a particularly dull episode of C-SPAN, the real horrors often lurked not in the shadows, but in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of an empire that lasted for nearly 3 centuries. Imagine, if you will, that you are a peasant in a small, dusty village in the mid-17th century. The air hangs heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. You're tending your meager plot of land, your back aching from dawn till dusk, for generations. Your family has known only the rule of the Ming, their edicts, their taxes, their distant, often indifferent presence. That's just how the world is. You've heard whispers, of course, of rebellion in the north, of a fierce people called the Manchus, riding on horseback, their banners a stark, terrifying yellow. You might dismiss them as rumors. The idle gossip of tired farmers. But then the whispers grow louder. The local magistrate seems nervous. Trade routes become unpredictable. And one morning, you wake to a different kind of silence. A tense quiet broken only by the distant drumming of hooves. Your world, the one you've always known, is about to be turned upside down. This isn't just history, it's a journey into a system so vast, so rigid, so utterly indifferent to individual suffering, that you'd probably last about 5 minutes before either being conscripted, starving, or accidentally offending a minor official and finding yourself on the wrong end of a bamboo stick. Seriously, survival rates back then? Not great. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always wild to think about people drifting off to sleep with my voice. All across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the vast, windswept plains of Manchuria, a land of harsh winters and fertile summers, where, even now, the biting wind seems to carry echoes of horse hooves and the clash of steel. It's the early 17th century, and the Ming Dynasty, far to the south, is bloated, corrupt, and slowly unraveling from within. Its emperors are increasingly isolated in the Forbidden City, lost in their own opulent world. While their armies are neglected and their people groan under the weight of crushing taxes and natural disasters, you see this decay with your own eyes, watching as once proud cities slowly succumb to brigandage and neglect here, in this raw and untamed north. A different story is unfolding. You observe the Jurchen tribes, a loose confederation of clans, who for centuries have been a minor nuisance. At best, to the mighty Ming, they are hardy, resilient people, skilled horsemen and fierce warriors, but fractured, often warring among themselves. Yet a man emerges from this fragmented landscape, a figure of immense charisma and ruthless ambition. Nurhaci. You watch as he, through a cunning mix of diplomacy and sheer military might, begins to unite these disparate tribes. He doesn't just conquer, he assimilates. He organizes. You see him creating a new identity, a new people, whom he will eventually call the Manchus. This isn't just about winning battles, it's about forging a collective consciousness, a shared destiny. Nurhaci's initial moves are subtle, almost imperceptible to the distant Ming court. You witness him consolidating power, absorbing smaller clans, often offering them a choice join or be annihilated. It's a pragmatic, brutal approach. He recognizes the power of symbols, of a unified vision. He commissions a new script, a written language for his people, further solidifying their distinct identity. You might see him discussing strategies with his sons and trusted generals, their faces illuminated by the flickering firelight in a simple yurt. While far away, Ming officials are probably arguing over the proper shade of silk for the emperor's new robe. The contrast is stark, almost comical in its implications, as Nurhaci's power grows. So does his ambition. You see him leading raids across the Ming border, not just for plunder, but to test the Ming defenses, to gauge their weakness. He's like a predator circling its prey, slowly assessing, waiting for the opportune moment. He establishes the 8-banner system, a revolutionary military and administrative structure. Imagine being organized into one of these banners. It's more than just a military unit. It's a complete societal structure. Your family, your livelihood, your entire existence is tied to your banner. It ensures loyalty, efficiency, and a constant supply of trained warriors. This brilliant organizational feat is one of the key reasons the Manchus, though numerically smaller than the Ming, would prove to be such a formidable force. You'd be drilled relentlessly, learning to ride and shoot with terrifying precision. Your life meticulously ordered, every aspect geared towards the strength of the banner. The Ming, meanwhile, are increasingly distracted by internal rebellions. You hear tales of starving peasants rising up in desperate acts of defiance, of bandit leaders like Li Zicheng gaining alarming strength, threatening the very foundations of the empire. The Ming court is too arrogant, too complacent to truly acknowledge the rising tide in the north. They see the Manchus as barbarians, uncivilized and incapable of true conquest, a common historical myopia that often precedes great falls. You might even hear some Ming scholars scoffing, convinced that their ancient civilization is inherently superior and impervious to such savage threats. This historical myopia, this inability to adapt or even correctly assess threats, is a fascinating and recurring theme throughout history. Nurhaci, however, isn't interested in academic debates. He's interested in power. You observe him declaring himself the Khan of the later Qing Dynasty, a direct challenge to the Ming's legitimacy. Consciously evoking the Jurchen Qing Dynasty that had once ruled northern China centuries ago. It's a powerful statement, a clear declaration of intent. He's not just a tribal leader, he's a sovereign, laying claim to the mandate of heaven itself. You can almost feel the tremor of fear that must have run through the Ming frontier garrisons as this news spread. After Nurhaci's death, his son, Hong Taiji, takes the reins. You witness his equally shrewd leadership. He's less of a warrior, more of a statesman and strategist. He recognizes the need to incorporate Chinese administrative practices to appeal to the Han Chinese population, not just conquer them. He starts to attract Ming officials who are disillusioned with their own corrupt government. He also formally renames his dynasty the Qing, meaning pure, a subtle but significant rebranding. It's a shrewd move, designed to project an image of legitimacy and order, a stark contrast to the chaos engulfing the Ming. You might find yourself marveling at his foresight, understanding that sheer military might alone would not be enough to hold a vast empire. The Qing's military machine, honed by decades of continuous warfare and the rigorous banner system, is becoming unstoppable. You see the sheer discipline of the Manchu cavalry, their coordinated movements, their devastating charges. They are a professional army, unlike the increasingly demoralized and underfunded Ming forces, who are often forced to fight on multiple fronts against internal rebels and external threats. Historians still debate whether the Ming's collapse was primarily due to internal strife or external Manchu pressure. It's a classic chicken or egg scenario in the grand tapestry of Chinese history. What is clear, however, is that both factors conspired to create a perfect storm as the Ming dynasty stumbles. plagued by famine, economic collapse, and a series of catastrophic rebellions. You watch as the Qing patiently, methodically, prepares for its ultimate strike. The mandate of heaven, that ancient Chinese concept of divine right to rule, seems to be visibly slipping from the Ming's grasp. You hear the stories of omens, of natural disasters, all interpreted as signs that the Ming has lost the favor of the heavens. For a superstitious population, these signs are far more potent than any political decree. You stand on the Great Wall, or at least what's left of it in some sections, looking south towards the vast, fertile plains of China. The air is thick with anticipation. The Ming capital, Beijing, is under siege. Not by the Manchus, but by the peasant rebel army of Li Zicheng, the dashing king. It's a chaotic, desperate situation. The Ming Emperor, Yongzheng, in a final act of despair, hangs himself from a tree in the imperial garden. Choosing death over capture by the rebels, the Qing Dynasty, after nearly 3 centuries, is over. But the story isn't over. Not by a long shot. The gate at Shanhai Pass, a crucial strategic choke point on the eastern end of the Great Wall, becomes the focal point, the Ming general guarding it. Wu Sangui finds himself in an impossible position: surrender to the peasant rebels, or make a deal with the barbarians he has spent his life fighting. You can almost feel his agonizing dilemma. He chooses the Manchus, a decision that will forever be etched in Chinese history as a moment of profound betrayal and pragmatism. This single decision, born of desperation and a desire for revenge against Li Zicheng, essentially opens the door for the Qing to march into China proper. You witness the scene unfold. Wu Sangui opens the gates. The Manchu armies, under the command of Prince Dorgon, sweep through, not as conquerors, but ostensibly as liberators, coming to restore order and avenge the Ming Emperor. It's a brilliant piece of political theater. The peasant rebels, though numerous, are disorganized and poorly led compared to the disciplined Manchu forces. You see the swift, brutal efficiency with which the Qing crush Li Zicheng's rebellion. Entering Beijing in triumph, the common people, weary of chaos and civil war, initially welcome them, hoping for stability, for an end to the endless cycle of violence. They are, after all, just looking for some semblance of peace, a chance to plant their crops and raise their families without constant fear. You stand amidst the jubilant crowds, or at least what appears to be jubilant crowds, watching the Qing armies parade through the gates of Beijing. The Manchu banners, a vibrant splash of yellow, red, and blue, flutter in the breeze. The air is thick with the dust kicked up by thousands of hooves and marching feet. For many Han Chinese, this moment is a strange mix of relief and trepidation. Relief that the chaos of Li Zicheng's rebellion is over, and trepidation about these new, foreign rulers. You might even spot a few curious, anxious faces in the throng, trying to decipher the intentions behind the stoic expressions of the Manchu soldiers. The Qing's initial strategy is one of calculated conciliation. They present themselves not as invaders, but as restorers of order, avengers of the Ming, and protectors of the people. Prince Dorgon, the effective regent for the young Emperor Shunji, issues pronouncements promising lower taxes, an end to corruption, and respect for traditional Chinese customs. You might overhear conversations among the common folk, some expressing cautious optimism, others a deep-seated suspicion. After all, a new dynasty always brings changes, and often, those changes are not for the better for the average person. However, beneath this veneer of benevolence, a far more brutal process of consolidation is swiftly set into motion. The Qing leadership understands that to truly rule China, they must break the spirit of resistance and establish unquestioned authority. The first, and perhaps most visually striking, Symbol of this new order is the Q order. You are suddenly faced with an imperial decree: all Han Chinese men must shave the front of their heads and braid the rest of their hair into a long queue, or pigtail, in the Manchu style. To refuse is to face execution. This isn't just about fashion, it's a profound act of submission. Imagine the shock, the outrage. Your hair, a deeply personal and culturally significant part of your identity, is now dictated by a foreign conqueror. You see men openly weeping as their queues are forcibly braided, knowing that this simple act marks them as subjects of a new, alien power. This was a direct assault on Han Chinese identity. A clear message: conform or die. The resistance in some areas was fierce, leading to massacres, proving that even a haircut could ignite a bloody rebellion beyond the queue. The Qing swiftly moved to dismantle any lingering pockets of Ming loyalty. You observe the brutal suppression of various regional rebellions that flare up across the south. These are not small skirmishes, they are protracted. Bloody conflicts. Cities that resist are often subjected to massacres, their populations decimated as a chilling warning to others. The infamous Yangzhou massacre and the Qing massacre serve as horrifying examples. You witness the scorched earth tactics, the indiscriminate slaughter, the sheer ruthlessness employed to crush any defiance. These events send a clear message: the Qing are here to stay, and resistance is futile and costly. It's a pragmatic, albeit monstrous, way to ensure control by instilling widespread fear simultaneously. The Qing begins to establish its own administrative structure, blending Manchu traditions with the existing Ming bureaucracy. You see Manchu officials appointed to key positions, often alongside Han Chinese counterparts, but with the real power resting with the Manchus. This system, while seemingly collaborative, ensures that ultimate authority always resides with the conquering elite. You might observe Han scholars and officials, initially hesitant, slowly bowing to the inevitable, realizing that their careers, and indeed their lives, depend on cooperating with the new regime. It's a delicate dance of power, ambition, and survival to manage the vastness of the empire. The Qing maintain the provincial structure of the Ming, but tighten control. You see the establishment of garrisons staffed by Manchu banner soldiers in strategic cities across China. These garrisons are not just military outposts, they are symbols of Qing power, constant reminders of who is truly in charge. You might walk past these imposing fortifications, feeling the subtle tension in the air, the omnipresent watch of the banner soldiers. This policy of internal occupation ensured that even in the most remote corners of the empire, the Qing presence was felt and respected, or more accurately, feared. The early Qing emperors also understood the importance of ideological control. You observe them carefully cultivating an image as Confucian rulers. Adopting the trappings of Chinese imperial tradition, they patronized scholarship, revived the civil service examination system, albeit with Manchu candidates given preferential treatment, and even performed traditional rituals. This is a clever strategy to legitimize their rule in the eyes of the Han Chinese elite, who valued classical learning and Confucian morality above all else. It's a subtle form of brainwashing, slowly persuading the conquered that their conquerors are, in fact, upholding their cherished values. You might hear the debates among scholars, some genuinely convinced by the Qing's embrace of Confucianism, others privately resentful but outwardly compliant. However, beneath this outward embrace of Chinese culture, the Qing maintain a strict racial hierarchy. You witness the continued separation of Manchus from Han Chinese. Marriage between the two groups is initially forbidden. Manchus are encouraged to retain their language and customs, and they are forbidden from engaging in trade or manual labor, instead living off stipends from the state, reinforcing their status as the ruling elite. You might see designated Manchu quarters in cities, a physical manifestation of this segregation, reinforcing the idea of a distinct ruling class. This segregation aimed to preserve Manchu identity and prevent assimilation, a constant worry for a ruling minority. The early decades of the Qing are marked by a series of military campaigns to extend and secure their borders. You see the Qing armies marching into new territories, bringing regions like Tibet, Mongolia, and parts of Central Asia under their control, often with considerable brutality. These campaigns are not just about expansion, they are about eliminating potential threats and securing resources. You witness the vast logistical efforts required to sustain such large armies in harsh terrain. The endless lines of supply carts, the grueling marches. These conquests lay the foundation for the territorial boundaries of modern China, a lasting legacy of Qing ambition and military might. The sheer scale of these military endeavors is staggering, requiring massive resources and unwavering commitment. One particular example of Qing ruthlessness in consolidating power is the Southern Ming resistance. You track the remnants of the Ming imperial family and their loyalist generals retreating south, attempting to establish various successor states. These Southern Ming regimes are often short-lived, plagued by internal divisions and lacking widespread support. You watch as the Qing systematically hunt them down, one by one, with relentless efficiency. The brutal capture and execution of princes, generals, and even common supporters of the Southern Ming is a stark reminder of the Qing's resolve to extinguish any flame of defiance. It's a protracted war of attrition, fought across difficult terrain. But the Qing's superior organization and determination ultimately prevail. You see the hopelessness in the eyes of the Southern Ming loyalists as their last bastions fall. The early emperors, particularly Kangxi, who ascends the throne in 1661, faced the immense challenge of truly stabilizing and unifying the empire. You witness his extraordinary energy and intellect. Kangxi embarks on numerous inspection tours, traveling extensively across the empire, personally assessing conditions, listening to petitions, and demonstrating his commitment to governing. This direct engagement, unheard of in previous dynasties, helps to foster a sense of connection with the common people and reinforces his image as a benevolent, yet firm, ruler. You might see him patiently listening to the grievances of local farmers, or sternly reprimanding corrupt officials. This personal touch, a rare detail for an emperor, undoubtedly contributed to the longevity of his reign. Yet, even under Kangxi, the iron fist remains within the velvet glove. You see the suppression of the revolt of the three feudatories, a massive rebellion led by three powerful Han Chinese generals who had initially helped the Qing conquer China. These generals, including Wu Songwei, had been granted vast semi-independent fiefdoms in the south. Kangxi, recognizing the long-term threat they posed to central authority, provokes them into rebellion, and then, through years of arduous fighting, systematically crushes them. It's a monumental struggle that almost cripples the Yong dynasty. But its successful suppression cements Kangxi's authority and truly unifies the empire under direct Qing rule. You witness the sheer scale of the conflict, the devastation wrought upon the southern provinces, and the ultimate triumph of the imperial forces. This was arguably the greatest internal challenge the Qing faced in its early years, and its overcoming solidified their grip. By the end of Kangxi's long and illustrious reign, the Qing dynasty is firmly established. You look across the vast expanse of China, from the windswept steppes of Mongolia to the lush rice paddies of the south, and see an empire that, despite its foreign origins, has successfully asserted its dominance. The horrors of the conquest and consolidation, the massacres, the forced assimilation, the brutal suppression of dissent have largely faded into memory for the average person, replaced by a yearning for peace and stability. The wounds are still there, deep beneath the surface, but for now, a fragile peace holds. The Qing have succeeded in their initial, terrifying objective. They have conquered China, and they intend to keep it. You step into a different era, one historians often refer to as the golden age of the Qing Dynasty. You feel the atmosphere seemingly stabilize, and though the memories of bloody conquest still simmer, a new sense of order has begun to emerge. This is the reign of three great emperors, Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong. They were not only intelligent rulers, but also the ones who shaped a vast, powerful empire, replete with horrifying secrets hidden beneath its veneer of prosperity. You witnessed the ascension of Emperor Kangxi, 1661 to 1722. A truly extraordinary figure. He ascended the throne at a very young age, but his intellect and determination soon became apparent. The revolt of the three feudatories, which you glimpsed in the previous section, was the greatest test for Kangxi's young dynasty. You sense the tension gripping the empire as the rebel armies ravaged the south. Kangxi, with surprising resolve, personally directed the war, demonstrating his excellent military leadership. You can see him working tirelessly late into the night, studying maps, issuing orders to deploy troops. Suppressing this rebellion not only solidified Kangxi's power, but also affirmed the Qing's unshakable dominance over all of China. Afterward, you follow Kangxi on his extensive inspection tours throughout the empire. He wasn't an emperor who remained secluded in the Forbidden City. You see him traveling across the provinces, personally inspecting dikes, visiting the populace, and even personally resolving minor legal cases. This direct engagement, a unique detail for an emperor, helped him gain a deeper understanding of the empire and win the support of the people. You can imagine a scene of an emperor, dressed more simply than usual, conversing with farmers by the roadside. A rare but deeply impressive sight. However, beneath that benevolent exterior, Kangxi was also an uncompromising ruler. You see him severely punishing corrupt officials, establishing tight supervisory bodies to ensure compliance. Under Kangxi's reign, you witness an explosion of culture and scholarship. He was a great patron of the arts and sciences. You see scholars encouraged to compile monumental works like the Kangxi Dictionary, a colossal achievement in the Chinese language. He also allowed Western Jesuit missionaries into China, not only for proselytizing, but also to learn about their scientific knowledge and technology. You can envision Jesuits presenting new world maps and complex astronomical instruments to an emperor eager to learn. This openness was a unique detail compared to many other Chinese dynasties, reflecting Kangxi's vision. However, historians still debate whether Kangxi truly understood the full implications of Western scientific advancements, or merely viewed them as interesting curiosities. After Kangxi, you witness the ascension of his son, Emperor Yongzheng, 1723–1735. Yongzheng's reign was shorter than his father's, but it was extremely focused on consolidating power and combating corruption. You feel the strictness and sometimes cruelty in his policies. Yongzheng was known for working tirelessly, sometimes sleeping only a few hours each night. You see him personally reading and approving countless memorials, handling even the smallest details of imperial administration. He was a master of information control and surveillance. You can see him establishing a sophisticated espionage system, known as secret memorials midja, allowing officials to send reports directly to the emperor without going through official channels, thereby tightly controlling the bureaucracy and detecting corruption. This helped him purge numerous corrupt officials and opponents, sometimes through horrific forms of torture and execution, revealing a darker side of concentrated power. Yongzheng also undertook significant financial reforms, focusing on streamlining the tax system and strengthening the state treasury. You see him issuing strict decrees to ensure taxes were collected sufficiently and more fairly. Although fairly often meant everyone had to pay taxes, including wealthy individuals who evaded their obligations. He also made efforts to address the issue of Manchu aristocratic families living off state stipends, forcing them to live more responsibly or face punishment. This is a common historical fact. Corruption and the extravagance of the aristocracy were always pressing issues in feudal dynasties. Yongzheng's decisiveness in addressing this helped solidify the financial foundation for the Qing Dynasty, laying the groundwork for the prosperity under his son. And then, you arrive at the reign of Emperor Qianlong, 1735-1796, a period when the Qing Dynasty reached its peak in terms of territory and power. You witness an unprecedentedly vast empire, stretching from Central Asia to the South China Sea. Qianlong, like his grandfather Kangxi, was a great patron of the arts and culture. You see massive libraries being built and art collections expanded. He was a lover of poetry, calligraphy, and painting, and he himself was a talented poet. He commissioned the compilation of the Siku Quanshu Complete Library in 4 branches of literature, a monumental encyclopedia that brought together all classical Chinese literature, history, philosophy, and science. Comprising over 3,600 books, an unprecedented feat in history, however, behind the glamour of culture and prosperity. Qianlong's reign also harbored horrifying secrets and brutality. You see Qianlong implementing the policy of literary inquisition, wenziyu, an extreme form of censorship and ideological suppression. Any work deemed critical of the Qing Dynasty, or even simply mentioning previous dynasties with reverence, could lead to the execution of the author and their entire family. You feel the fear pervading the scholarly community, who had to be extremely careful with every word they wrote. Many books were burned, and many intellectuals were killed under the guise of ideological purification. This is one of the darkest aspects of Qianlong's reign, a chilling truth about how absolute power can stifle intellectual freedom. Qianlong also conducted many costly military campaigns to expand and consolidate borders. Especially in Tibet and Xinjiang, you witness long, drawn-out wars that consumed vast resources and human lives. Although these victories helped solidify the empire's territorial integrity, they also contributed to the depletion of the treasury. You see financial burdens beginning to emerge. Although at the time, prosperity still masked these problems. By the end of Qianlong's long and illustrious reign, you start to see signs of decline, corruption, despite Yongzheng's efforts to eradicate it, began to creep back in, especially under the influence of Hessian, a powerful and extremely greedy official. You see Hessian manipulating the court, exploiting Qianlong's trust to amass a colossal fortune through bribery and embezzlement. This is a common historical fact about the decline that often occurs at the end of the reigns of aging emperors. And Hessian is a prime example of this. Qianlong, in his old age, became more oblivious to what was happening. Blindly trusting Hessian, this weakness in governance created a large loophole for rampant corruption to flourish. You also notice the court's indifference to Western scientific and technological advancements. Although Kangxi had once been open to the Jesuits, under Qianlong, China became increasingly isolated. You see trade and diplomatic missions from Britain, like the McCartney Embassy in 1793, being coldly received, and their requests for free trade flatly rejected. Qianlong still believed that China was the celestial empire and needed nothing from the Western barbarians. This arrogance, a unique detail for Eastern dynasties compared to the openness of Western nations, would become a key factor leading to the later decline of the Qing dynasty. You see scattered peasant uprisings beginning to appear, foreshadowing greater instability to come. The population grew rapidly. Arable land was insufficient, and the burden of taxes increasingly weighed on the people. Secret societies like the White Lotus Society began to attract members, sowing the seeds for larger-scale rebellions. Although the reigns of Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong were a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity, the seeds of decline, of more horrifying secrets, were sown within the very heart of that prosperity. You sense a harsh truth even in the most glorious periods. Hidden cracks always exist. Waiting for the moment to shatter the entire structure, you are now immersed in the hidden world of the Forbidden City, a place of immense power and unimaginable luxury, yet also a hotbed of intrigue and corruption, while the emperors Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong projected an image of absolute authority and moral rectitude. Behind the vermilion walls, a shadow play of ambition, deceit, and power struggles constantly unfolded. You move through the opulent halls and secluded courtyards, catching glimpses of the real machinations that often shaped the fate of the empire. One of the most insidious forms of corruption you witness is the pervasive influence of the eunuchs. These men, castrated to serve in the inner court, were theoretically powerless, mere servants. Yet, their proximity to the emperor and the imperial family granted them immense opportunities for illicit gains. You observe how a seemingly minor eunuch, responsible for overseeing imperial supplies, could demand kickbacks from merchants, inflating prices and siphoning off vast sums of money, or how another, tasked with managing imperial concubines, could facilitate secret meetings for bribes, creating a network of blackmail and favors. This wasn't just petty theft, it was systemic. Eunuchs would often form alliances with corrupt officials on the outside, creating powerful cliques that could manipulate appointments, sway imperial decisions, and divert immense wealth from the state coffers. You might hear hushed whispers about a powerful eunuch orchestrating the downfall of a principled official simply because he refused to partake in their schemes. The emperor, often isolated and relying on these very eunuchs for information, would sometimes be the last to know. If he ever did, the concubines, too, played a significant, albeit often tragic, role in this web of intrigue. Their lives were a constant competition for the emperor's favor, for security, and for the advancement of their families. You witness the elaborate rituals and subtle maneuvers within the harem, where a favored concubine could subtly influence the emperor's mood, drop a well-placed word about a rival, or champion a particular policy. While not directly corrupt in the financial sense, their influence could easily be bought or swayed by powerful factions outside the palace. Imagine the desperation of a concubine, seeing her influence wane, resorting to desperate measures, perhaps even poisoning a rival or fabricating evidence against an enemy, all to secure her position and her son's future. The Forbidden City, for them, was a gilded cage, and survival often depended on mastering the art of court politics. As the Qing Dynasty matured, particularly after the peak of Qianlong's reign, the rot of corruption began to spread from the inner court outwards, like a slow, creeping poison. You observe how the civil service examination system, once a cornerstone of meritocracy, became increasingly susceptible to bribery and favoritism. Wealthy families could bribe examiners to ensure their sons passed, or even purchase examination papers outright. This meant that incompetent but well-connected individuals often filled crucial government positions, leading to a decline in administrative efficiency and an increase in further corruption down the line. You might witness a scene where a bright, diligent scholar, who had studied his entire life, is heartbroken to find himself consistently failing the examinations, while less capable but wealthier peers secure prestigious appointments. This erosion of meritocracy was a direct attack on the very foundation of good governance. The most notorious example of this widespread corruption emerges in the figure of Haitian, a Manchu official who gained immense power and wealth during the latter part of Qianlong's reign. You see him, a man of striking intelligence and charm, rapidly ascend through the ranks, quickly becoming the emperor's most trusted confidant. But beneath this charismatic exterior lay an insatiable greed. He masterfully exploited Qianlong's advancing age and increasing detachment, essentially acting as a gatekeeper to the emperor, controlling who had access and what information reached his ears. You witness Haitian's network of corruption spread like an octopus's tentacles throughout the empire, He manipulated government contracts, extorted money from local officials, and demanded exorbitant fees for appointments and promotions. For instance, if you were a provincial governor hoping for a promotion, you would first have to offer a substantial gift to Hessian. This wasn't a secret, it was an open secret. A horrifying aspect of everyday administration. Hessian's personal wealth grew to an astronomical level, dwarfing the imperial treasury itself. You see his vast mansions, filled with priceless treasures, his granaries overflowing with grain even as ordinary people starved. This stark contrast, this flaunting of illicit wealth, was a source of deep resentment among the populace and even among honest officials. It's a common historical phenomenon that unchecked power often leads to immense personal enrichment at the expense of the state. But Hessian's case was particularly egregious. Historians still debate the extent to which Qianlong was truly unaware of Hessian's corruption, or if he simply chose to ignore it due to old age and affection for his favored minister. It's a question that plagues the legacy of an otherwise great emperor. This rampant corruption had devastating consequences for the empire. You witness its direct impact on the military. Funds meant for army supplies and equipment were often embezzled, leaving soldiers ill-equipped and poorly trained when rebellions broke out. The local garrisons, starved of resources, were often ineffective in suppressing them, forcing the central government to dispatch larger, more expensive armies, further straining the already depleted treasury. You see soldiers marching with worn-out uniforms and rusty weapons, a grim testament to the corruption that permeated every level of the state. The judicial system also became deeply compromised. You observe how justice could be bought, with the wealthy and influential escaping punishment for their crimes, while the poor and powerless faced arbitrary arrests and harsh sentences. Bribery became commonplace in the courts, leading to widespread disillusionment with the government. Imagine being a peasant falsely accused of a crime, knowing that you had no hope of a fair trial because you couldn't afford to bribe the magistrate. This breakdown of justice eroded public trust and fueled resentment, which would later manifest in widespread unrest. Furthermore, the system of grain storage and distribution, crucial for preventing famine, was often riddled with corruption. Funds allocated for maintaining granaries were diverted, and officials would often sell off imperial grain reserves for personal profit, leaving the population vulnerable during times of drought or flood. You see the devastating effects of this widespread famine. Starving peasants forced to abandon their homes, their desperation growing with each passing day. This isn't just about money, it's about the fundamental failure of the state to protect its people. Directly linked to the greed of its officials, the internal struggles within the Manchu elite themselves also contributed to instability, while the early Qing emperors skillfully balanced power among the various banner factions. By the later period, internal rivalries and power struggles within the imperial family and among the banner generals became more pronounced. You witness the subtle yet intense competition for influence, often leading to infighting and undermining central authority. This created a sense of instability at the very top, radiating outwards through the entire bureaucracy. For instance, you might observe two powerful Manchu families vying for control over a key ministry, employing every possible tactic, from slander to outright sabotage, to undermine their rivals. Even the imperial family itself was not immune to these hidden horrors, while outwardly portraying an image of Confucian harmony. Internal conflicts, infanticide to secure succession, and desperate attempts to gain imperial favor were not uncommon. You might hear hushed rumors of a child prince being quietly removed from the succession line, or a concubine suffering a sudden illness after giving birth to a son who posed a threat to the established heir. These dark tales, though rarely officially recorded, were part of the terrifying reality of imperial power. The constant need to secure revenue for the increasingly lavish imperial court and the corrupt officials also led to an escalating burden on the common people. You see new taxes being levied, often unfairly, and local officials extracting additional fees that went straight into their own pockets. The average farmer, already struggling, found themselves squeezed from all directions, leading to increasing poverty and despair. This growing economic hardship among the populace was a direct consequence of the systemic corruption at the highest levels of government. The collective impact of this pervasive intrigue and corruption was a slow, almost imperceptible weakening of the Qing state from within. It eroded trust between the government and the governed, sapped the empire's financial strength, undermined its military effectiveness, and led to a general sense of decline. You are watching a great empire, once seemingly invincible, slowly being eaten away by its own internal diseases. The horrors aren't always dramatic acts of violence sometimes. They are the quiet, relentless decay of institutions and morality. An infinitely more insidious process. This slow, internal rot, often overlooked in favor of more dramatic external events. Set the stage for the dramatic clashes that were soon to come. You find yourself standing on the precipice of a monumental shift, a clash of civilizations that would forever alter the course of Chinese history. The year is the early 19th century, and the majestic, self-sufficient empire you've witnessed ascend to such heights is about to collide with a force that barely comprehends the burgeoning industrial might and aggressive mercantile ambition of the West. This collision, marked by the infamous Opium Wars, would expose the horrifying vulnerabilities of the Qing Dynasty and set in motion its long, agonizing decline. For centuries, China had largely controlled its trade with the outside world. You see the bustling port of Canton Guangzhou, the only place where foreign merchants, primarily British, were allowed to conduct business. It's a highly regulated system, known as the Canton system. You observe the strict rules. Foreigners are confined to a small area, prohibited from learning Chinese, forbidden from bringing their families, and only allowed to trade with a select group of Chinese merchants known as the Kohong. This system, designed to control and limit foreign influence, worked for a time. China, with its silks, teas, and porcelains, had what the West wanted, and demanded payment in silver. You might hear British merchants grumbling about the restrictions, but they grudgingly complied because the demand for Chinese goods in Europe was insatiable. However, the balance of trade was heavily skewed in China's favor. You see vast amounts of silver flowing into China, while the British, desperately seeking a commodity to offset this imbalance, finally found their answer: opium. You witness the insidious growth of this trade, grown in British India. Opium is smuggled into China on an ever-increasing scale. At first, it's a trickle, then a stream, and soon, a raging torrent. The British East India Company, though officially forbidden from trading opium in China, conveniently looks the other way as private British merchants, like the infamous Jardine Matheson, rake in immense profits. You see the devastating consequences unfolding across Chinese society. Opium addiction spreads like a plague, affecting all strata, from the poorest coolies to high-ranking officials and even members of the imperial family. Imagine the hollow eyes, the emaciated bodies, the desperate cravings of the addicts you encounter on the streets. Families are ruined, fortunes squandered, and productivity plummets. This isn't just an economic problem, it's a profound social and moral crisis. The silver that once flowed into China now drains out at an alarming rate, exacerbating economic woes and creating inflation. You might see a government official, once upright, now secretly selling off his family heirlooms to feed his addiction. This pervasive addiction, often overlooked in the grand narratives of imperial decline, was a truly horrifying secret that gnawed at the very fabric of Chinese society. The Qing court, initially slow to grasp the full extent of the problem due to corruption and misinformation, eventually recognizes the catastrophe. You witness the debates raging within the imperial palace, Some officials advocate for legalization and taxation, believing it's the only way to control the trade. Others, like the resolute Commissioner Lin Zexu, demand a complete and forceful suppression of opium. Lin Zexu, a man of uncompromising integrity, is appointed imperial commissioner in Canton in 1839 with a clear mandate to stamp out the opium trade. You observe Commissioner Lin's decisive actions. He acts with extraordinary courage and efficiency. He demands that foreign merchants surrender their opium stockpiles, threatening severe punishment for non-compliance. You witness the dramatic scene at Human, near Canton, where Lin orders the destruction of over 20,000 chests of opium, mixing it with lime and salt and washing it out to sea. It's a powerful symbolic act, a clear defiance of British economic power. He also clamps down on Chinese addicts and dealers, imposing harsh penalties. This bold move, while morally righteous, is seen by the British as a direct attack on their property rights and a grievous insult. The British response is swift and overwhelming. You see the arrival of powerful British warships, their cannons gleaming ominously in the sunlight. They are technological marvels compared to the antiquated Chinese junks and coastal defenses. The First Opium War, 1839-1842, begins. You witness the shocking disparity in military power. The British, with their steam-powered gunboats and superior artillery, easily overwhelm Chinese coastal defenses. Forts, and even major cities like Shanghai and Nanjing, the Qing armies, hampered by outdated weaponry. Poor training and corrupt leadership, remember that embezzlement of military funds from earlier, are no match. You might see the desperation on the faces of Chinese soldiers, armed with muskets and spears, facing overwhelming firepower. The war is a humiliating defeat for the Qing. You see the signing of the Treaty of Nanjing in 1842, the first of what would become known as the unequal treaties. Imagine the grim atmosphere as Chinese officials, accustomed to dictating terms to foreign barbarians, are forced to concede to the demands of a Western power. The terms are brutal. China must pay a massive indemnity, a war fine, cede Hong Kong Island to Britain in perpetuity, open 5 new treaty ports including Shanghai and Canton to foreign trade, and grant extraterritoriality to British subjects, meaning they would be subject to British law, not Chinese law, even on Chinese soil. This granting of extraterritoriality is a profound insult to Chinese sovereignty, a stark testament to their weakened position. The Treaty of Nanjing marks the beginning of a new, horrifying chapter for China. It shatters the myth of Chinese invincibility and self-sufficiency. You see other Western powers, including France and the United States, quickly demand similar concessions, leading to a cascade of more unequal treaties. This process is like a wound that refuses to heal, constantly being reopened and deepened. But the Opium Wars are not just a single event. You witness the escalation of tensions, culminating in the Second Opium War, 1856-1860. This time, Britain and France team up, citing various pretexts, including the boarding of a Chinese-owned ship and the murder of a French missionary. You see even greater devastation. The Anglo-French forces, even more technologically advanced, storm through China. They push deep into the interior, reaching Beijing itself. The ultimate horror of this war unfolds as you witness the burning and looting of the old summer palace Yuanming Yuan in 1860 by Anglo-French forces. This wasn't just a palace, it was an unparalleled masterpiece of Chinese imperial art and architecture. A vast complex of gardens, temples, and magnificent buildings filled with countless treasures accumulated over centuries. Imagine the smoke billowing from burning pavilions, the screams of those who tried to defend it, the systematic destruction of irreplaceable cultural heritage. You see soldiers smashing priceless porcelain, stealing ancient bronzes, and setting fire to structures that had taken generations to build. This act of vandalism and destruction is deliberately punitive, a barbaric message sent to the Qing court about the consequences of resistance. It's a profound humiliation, a wound that would fester in the Chinese psyche for generations, a chilling reminder of the utter contempt with which Western powers sometimes viewed Chinese sovereignty and culture. This act of wanton destruction is a horrifying secret not in its concealment, but in its sheer barbarity and historical impact. The resulting Convention of Peking, 1860, forces even more humiliating concessions. China has to open more treaty ports, legalize the opium trade, a truly horrifying capitulation given the initial cause of the war, allow foreign legations in Beijing, and grant Christian missionaries freedom to preach throughout the country. You see foreign gunboats now patrolling China's internal rivers, further encroaching on Chinese sovereignty. The Opium Wars irrevocably changed China's relationship with the world. You see the proud celestial empire reduced to a semi-colonial status, its ports swarming with foreign traders, its sovereignty chipped away piece by piece. The long-held belief in Chinese superiority is shattered, replaced by a painful awareness of its technological and military backwardness. This conflict, born out of a desire for profit and fueled by a destructive drug, laid bare the deep-seated problems within the Qing Dynasty, its arrogance, its corruption, its inability to adapt. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a profound psychological blow. A realization that the terrifying secrets of the Qing's internal decay had now been brutally exposed on the global stage. Historians still fiercely debate the precise moment the Qing dynasty truly began its irrevocable decline. But the Opium Wars are undeniably a pivotal turning point, a catastrophic unraveling of the imperial system. You find yourself amidst the rumbling of discontent, a deep tremor spreading across the vast plains and teeming cities of China. The humiliation of the Opium Wars, though a profound shock, was merely a prelude to the internal cataclysms that would shake the Qing dynasty to its very foundations. You are about to witness an era defined by rebellions and decline, a period where the horrifying secrets of the Qing's internal decay burst forth in a series of devastating uprisings, the most cataclysmic of these. A conflict so immense it's often considered one of the deadliest wars in human history. Is the Taiping Rebellion, 1850-1864? You observe its origins in the impoverished southern provinces, a hotbed of resentment against Qing rule, foreign encroachment, and widespread suffering caused by economic hardship and natural disasters. Into this volatile mix steps Hong Xiuquan, a disillusioned scholar who, after failing the civil service examinations multiple times, experiences visions and declares himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ. Sent to establish a new heavenly kingdom on earth, you see Hong Xiuquan, initially a humble figure, begin to preach a unique blend of Christian theology and Chinese millenarianism. He attracts followers from among the dispossessed, the impoverished, and those disillusioned with the corrupt Qing regime. His message resonates deeply in end to Qing rule, social equality, shared property, and the abolition of practices like foot binding and opium use. This wasn't just a political rebellion. It was a radical social and religious movement. You witness the fervent devotion of his early followers, their willingness to sacrifice everything for the promise of a better world. The Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, as Hong Xiuquan named it, rapidly gains momentum. You observe its armies, initially poorly armed but fiercely motivated. Sweeping across southern China, they capture cities with shocking speed, their ranks swelling with new recruits from the desperate populace. The Qing armies, still reeling from the Opium Wars and plagued by corruption, prove largely ineffective in halting their advance. You might see a Qing official, panicked, dispatching an urgent memorial to Beijing, describing the overwhelming force of the Taiping rebels. The Taiping capture of Nanjing in 1853 is a pivotal moment. You witness the brutal siege and subsequent conquest of the city, which they rename Tianjin, Heavenly Capital. Nanjing becomes the heart of their new kingdom, a stark challenge to Qing authority. Here, The Taiping implement their radical social reforms, land redistribution, gender equality, women could serve as soldiers and officials, a revolutionary concept, and the prohibition of opium, gambling, and prostitution. While these reforms seemed progressive on paper, the Taiping regime was also authoritarian and often brutally repressed dissent within its own ranks. You might hear stories of strict internal discipline and severe punishments for minor infractions within the Taiping zones, another one of the horrifying secrets of the rebellion itself. The war drags on for over a decade, a sprawling, bloody conflict that engulfs 16 provinces. You witness the sheer scale of the devastation, vast swathes of agricultural land laid waste, cities reduced to ruins, and countless lives lost. The death toll is staggering, estimated to be between 20 and 30 million people, more than any other conflict in the 19th century. This wasn't just battles, it was widespread famine, disease, and societal collapse. You see the desperate flight of refugees, their faces gaunt with hunger and fear, as they try to escape the endless cycle of violence. This scale of human suffering is a terrifying testament to the internal weakness of the Qing and the ferocity of the rebellion. The Qing Dynasty, however, does not collapse immediately. You observe the rise of regional armies composed primarily of Han Chinese, led by loyal scholar officials like Zheng Guofan and Li Hongzhang. These generals, recognizing the existential threat posed by the Taiping, build their own disciplined forces, often incorporating Western weaponry and tactics. This marks a crucial shift in the Qing's reliance on Han Chinese regional power, rather than solely on the flagging Manchu banner armies, to suppress internal threats. You might see Zheng Guofan, a Confucian scholar turned general, meticulously training his Hunan army, instilling in them a rigid discipline and loyalty to the Qing. Foreign powers, initially hesitant, eventually throw their support behind the Qing. You see British and French officers, like Charles George Chinese Gordon, leading ever-victorious army forces, often composed of Chinese soldiers but trained and commanded by Westerners. They provide crucial military assistance, including modern artillery and naval support, tilting the balance against the Taiping. This foreign intervention highlights another horrifying truth: the Qing, once so proud and self-sufficient, now relied on the very powers that had humiliated them in the Opium Wars to save their empire from internal collapse. As the Taiping Rebellion finally collapses in 1864 with the recapture of Nanjing, you witness the brutal aftermath. The city is subjected to a horrific massacre by Qing forces, a final act of vengeance against the rebels. Hong Xiuquan dies possibly by suicide before the city falls, and many of his followers are systematically executed. The cost of victory is immense: a devastated countryside, a crippled economy, and a deep sense of trauma across the nation. But the Taiping Rebellion was not the only internal uprising. You see other significant rebellions flare up, further draining Qing resources and manpower. The Nian Rebellion, 1853-1868 in the north, primarily a bandit-like movement fueled by famine and Qing neglect, overlaps with the Taiping, forcing the Qing to fight on multiple fronts. You also witness the Muslim rebellions in the northwest, 1862-1877, and the southwest, 1856-1873, driven by ethnic and religious grievances against Qing rule. These regional conflicts, though less famous than the Taiping, also contributed significantly to the widespread chaos and loss of life. The continuous cycle of rebellion and suppression had profound, long-term consequences. You observe the dramatic shift in power dynamics within the Qing state. The central government, weakened and bankrupt, becomes increasingly reliant on powerful regional governors and their Han Chinese armies. This decentralization of power, a common historical pattern during dynastic decline, meant that while the Qing imperial authority nominally remained, real power was increasingly dispersed. You might notice the growing prestige and influence of figures like Li Hongzheng, who effectively controlled vast armies and economic resources, often acting with considerable autonomy from Beijing. Furthermore, the rebellions forced the Qing to reluctantly embrace self-strengthening. You see officials recognizing the urgent need to adopt Western military technology and industrial methods to survive. Arsenals and shipyards are built, and students are sent abroad to study. This is a crucial pivot, a belated attempt to modernize. However, the efforts are often half-hearted, hampered by conservative elements within the court, persistent corruption, those embezzled funds. Remember, and a fundamental reluctance to abandon traditional ways. You might hear debates among officials, some advocating for deeper reforms, others clinging to the belief that Chinese traditional values were inherently superior. Historians still debate whether the self-strengthening movement was a genuine attempt at modernization or merely a superficial response to immediate threats. The constant drain of resources from these internal conflicts leaves the Qing vulnerable to further foreign encroachment. You see how the Western powers, far from being deterred by the chaos, actually exploit China's internal weakness to press for more concessions, more treaty ports, and greater spheres of influence. The horrifying truth is that China's internal turmoil created opportunities for external exploitation, accelerating its decline by the late 19th century. The Qing Dynasty is a shadow of its former glory. You sense a pervasive weariness throughout the empire. The once mighty dragon now appears wounded and bleeding, constantly battling both internal demons and external predators. The secrets are no longer hidden. They are laid bare for the world to see: a decaying imperial system, a society racked by poverty and addiction, and a ruling elite struggling desperately, often incompetently, to maintain control. The stage is set for the dynasty's final, agonizing acts. You are now in the late 19th century, a time when the Qing Dynasty, battered by internal rebellions and external aggressions, finds itself under the formidable, often controversial, shadow of Empress Dowager Cixi. She is a figure of immense power, often reviled by later historians as an autocratic tyrant who resisted reform, yet also a pragmatic survivor who, for decades, held the crumbling empire together. You will stand in her formidable presence, witnessing her shrewd manipulations and her desperate attempts to navigate a world that was rapidly leaving China behind. Born a Manchu, Cixi entered the Forbidden City as a low-ranking concubine of Emperor Xianfeng. You trace her remarkable rise, a testament to her intelligence, ambition, and ruthless political acumen. After the emperor's death in 1861, leaving behind a young son who would become Emperor Tongji and a power vacuum, Cixi, along with the Empress Dowager Qian, staged a coup against a regency council. You see the sheer audacity of this move: two women seizing control in a deeply patriarchal society. Cixi's cunning and ability to forge alliances allowed her to emerge as the dominant figure among the two empresses, Dowager. This secret coup, a brutal struggle for power behind closed doors, solidified her grip on the throne for the next 5 decades. Cixi was the de facto ruler of China. You witness her operate from behind a screen during audiences with male officials. Upholding traditional protocol while exerting absolute authority, her influence permeated every aspect of government, from imperial appointments to military policy. You might hear the hushed whispers of officials, knowing that their careers, and indeed their lives, depended on gaining her favor. One of the most defining aspects of Cixi's rule is her complex relationship with reform. You observe the Qing court's belated and often contradictory efforts at self-strengthening. Cixi, while initially suspicious of Western ideas, grudgingly recognized the need for military and industrial modernization to protect the dynasty. You see her approving the establishment of arsenals, shipyards, and modern schools for foreign languages and military training. Naval academies are founded, and some Chinese students are even sent abroad to study. This pragmatic approach a reluctant embrace of change, stands in stark contrast to the absolute rejection of foreign ways seen earlier. You might see a modern warship being built in a Chinese shipyard, a symbol of progress, yet still dwarfed by the sheer might of the foreign navies that patrolled China's coast. However, Cixi's support for reform was always limited by her primary goal, the preservation of Manchu rule, and the Qing Dynasty's traditional power structure. You see her consistently prioritize dynastic stability over radical societal change. For example, while she allowed for some military modernization, she often diverted funds for personal luxury, like the infamous reconstruction of the summer palace Yiheyuan using funds originally earmarked for the navy. This glaring example of her self-interest, a horrifying secret in itself, directly contributed to the weakness of the Chinese fleet during the First Sino-Japanese War. You might witness her delighting in a new marble boat, oblivious or indifferent to the implications for national defense. This internal conflict between preserving tradition and adopting modernity was a constant tension during her reign. The First Sino-Japanese War, 1894-1895, is a brutal awakening for Cixi and the Qing court. You witness the shocking defeat of China by a rapidly modernizing Japan, a former tributary state that China had long dismissed as insignificant. The war exposes the utter failure of the self-strengthening movement to genuinely transform China's military. You see the Chinese Beiyang fleet, once considered formidable, utterly annihilated by the Japanese Navy. Despite having some modern ships, this humiliating loss, a stark illustration of China's backwardness, leads to the Treaty of Shimonoseki, where China is forced to cede Taiwan, recognize Korea's independence ending China's suzerainty, and pay a massive indemnity. The loss to Japan, an Asian power, is perhaps even more psychologically devastating than the defeats by Western nations. In the aftermath of this defeat, you observe a desperate surge for more radical reform, known as the 100 Days Reform, 1898, led by the young Emperor Guangxu, Cixi's nephew and adopted son, and guided by progressive scholars like Kong Yue and Liang Qichao. This movement attempts to rapidly modernize China's political, educational, and economic systems. You see the flurry of imperial decrees issued by Guangxu, aiming to abolish the outdated examination system, establish a constitutional monarchy, and promote Western learning. This period is a brief, hopeful flicker of light for those who believed China could transform itself. However, Cixi, seeing her power threatened by these sweeping changes and fearing the loss of Manchu prerogatives, swiftly crushes the reform movement. You witness her decisive coup d'etat, placing Emperor Guangxu under house arrest, effectively ending his reign and executing the leading reformers, often without trial. This brutal suppression, a chilling reminder of her ruthless grip on power, sends a clear message: reform would only be tolerated if it didn't undermine her authority or the fundamental structure of the Qing. This act, driven by self-preservation, is a horrifying secret of imperial resistance to necessary change. Cementing her image as an arch-conservative, the culmination of China's internal and external pressures explodes in the Boxer Uprising, 1899-1901. You see the rise of the righteous and harmonious fists, Boxers, a peasant-led, anti-foreign and anti-Christian movement fueled by poverty, resentment against foreign encroachment, and natural disasters. They believe they are invulnerable to foreign bullets through spiritual rituals. Initially hostile to the Qing, they are eventually manipulated by conservative elements within the court who see them as a tool to expel foreigners. You witness Cixi's fateful decision to declare war on the 8-nation alliance: Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Russia, Austro-Hungary, and the United States in 1900, largely swayed by her belief in the Boxers' supernatural powers and by conservative anti-foreign factions. This is a monumental miscalculation, a final, desperate gamble. You see the siege of the foreign legations in Beijing, a chaotic and violent period, the Boxers, along with some Qing imperial troops, attack foreign diplomatic compounds, churches, and Chinese Christians. The eight-nation alliance responds with overwhelming force. You witness the brutal foreign invasion, their troops marching into Beijing to relieve the legations. The imperial court, including Cixi and Guangxu, flees the capital in disarray, a deeply humiliating spectacle. You see the subsequent looting and desecration of Beijing by foreign troops, another devastating blow to Chinese sovereignty and pride. The Boxer Protocol 1901 is the final, most humiliating of the unequal treaties. You see its harsh terms. China must pay an enormous indemnity, allow foreign powers to station troops permanently in Beijing, punish officials who supported the Boxers, and dismantle its coastal defenses. This treaty effectively turns China into a semi-colony, its sovereignty severely compromised. For Cixi, it's a bitter pill to swallow, a crushing defeat that further exposes the deep decay of the Qing, despite these catastrophic failures. Cixi, with remarkable resilience, attempts a final round of reforms in her last years, known as the New Policies. You see her reluctantly embracing constitutionalism, educational reform, and military modernization. However, these reforms are too little, too late. The seeds of revolution have already been sown. Her own role in both resisting and reluctantly embracing change leaves historians deeply divided. Was she a villain who clung to power, or a shrewd survivor who merely did what was necessary to preserve her dynasty in a brutal era? The terrifying secret is that her personal ambition and traditional mindset ultimately paved the way for the dynasty's final collapse. Despite her efforts to preserve it, you are now in the opening years of the 20th century, and the Qing Dynasty, though still nominally in power, is teetering on the brink of collapse. The internal decay and external pressures you've witnessed have created an irreversible momentum towards its end. This is the fall of the empire, a tumultuous period where revolutionary fervor sweeps across China, leading to the dramatic overthrow of millennia of imperial rule. Despite Empress Dowager Cixi's belated attempts at reform with the New Policies after the Boxer Protocol, these efforts were too little, too late. You see the contradictions inherent in these reforms. While they aim to modernize the military, establish new schools, and even propose a constitutional monarchy, they were fundamentally designed to strengthen the Qing's rule, not to fundamentally change the system or empower the people. For example, you might observe new schools being built, but the curriculum is still heavily influenced by traditional Confucian thought, and political education remains tightly controlled. The chilling secret here is that the reforms were a desperate attempt to maintain power, not a genuine embrace of progress. The most potent force driving the dynasty's demise is the rising tide of revolutionaries. You see figures like Sun Yat-sen, a Western-educated doctor, emerge as a charismatic leader advocating for a complete overthrow of the Qing and the establishment of a republic. He organizes secret societies and raises funds from overseas Chinese communities, tirelessly campaigning for his vision of a modern, democratic China. You might hear him passionately arguing that the Qing, being a foreign Manchu dynasty, was inherently incapable of saving China, and only a republic could restore national pride and sovereignty. His ideas, though initially dismissed by many, gained traction among students, intellectuals, and military officers disillusioned with the Qing. The Qing court, meanwhile, is plagued by infighting and incompetence, especially after the deaths of both Emperor Guangxu and Empress Dowager Cixi in quick succession in 1908. You witness the ascension of the child Emperor Puyi, a mere infant, and the regency of Prince Chun, his father. This power vacuum at the top exacerbates the sense of drift and weakness. Imagine the chaos behind the scenes as various factions jockey for influence. With no strong hand to guide the ship of state through increasingly turbulent waters, the imperial family, once the symbol of absolute power, now seems remote and out of touch. a chilling secret in itself. How far removed they were from the suffering of the populace? The most significant immediate cause of the revolution is the railway protection movement of 1911. You observe the Qing government's disastrous decision to nationalize privately owned railway lines, many of which had been built with local Chinese investment, often by ordinary citizens pooling their meager resources. This move, intended to raise funds and centralize control, is perceived as a blatant betrayal and an act of corruption, as much of the money raised was funneled to foreign banks and corrupt officials. You see widespread protests erupt across the country, particularly in Sichuan province, where local gentry and merchants had invested heavily in railway construction. This popular anger provides the spark. The Wuchang Uprising on October 10, 1911, marks the official beginning of the Xinhai Revolution. You witness the accidental explosion in a revolutionary safe house in Wuchang, which forces the conspirators to act prematurely. Revolutionary soldiers within the new army Qing's modernized military quickly rise up, seizing control of the city. The speed with which other provinces declare their independence from Qing rule is astonishing. You see provinces across southern and central China, one after another, hoist the Republican flag, their calls for revolution echoing across the land. This rapid fragmentation demonstrates how fragile Qing control truly was. The Qing court's response is one of paralysis and indecision. You observe their desperate attempts to suppress the rebellion, but their military forces are demoralized and disloyal. They turn to Yuan Shikai, a powerful general who had once served Cixi and built a formidable Beiyang army. Yuan is a shrewd opportunist. He plays both sides, negotiating with the revolutionaries while extracting concessions from the ailing Qing court. You see him demanding vast powers and resources from the imperial family, effectively holding them hostage. His ultimate loyalty is to himself, as the revolution gains momentum, with provinces declaring independence and forming their own provisional governments. The Qing Dynasty finds itself isolated and powerless. You witness the final, agonizing negotiations between the revolutionaries and Yuan Shikai, the revolutionaries, led by Sun Yat-sen, who briefly serves as provisional president of the Republic of China, realize they lack the military strength to defeat Yuan's Beiyang army. In a pragmatic move, they agree to offer the presidency to Yuan Shikai in exchange for his assurance that he would force the emperor to abdicate. On February 12, 1912, the unthinkable happens. You stand witness to the official abdication of Emperor Puyi, a mere 6-year-old child, ending over 2,000 years of continuous imperial rule in China. The Imperial Edict of Abdication is issued, a formal end to the Qing Dynasty. Imagine the emotional weight of that moment, the final curtain falling on an institution that had shaped Chinese civilization for millennia. It's a surreal blend of relief, uncertainty, and a profound sense of historical change. The fall of the Qing isn't just a political event, it's a societal earthquake. You see the traditional institutions and social structures that had defined China for centuries begin to crumble. The queue, once a symbol of Manchu dominance, is now a target of ridicule, with many men eagerly cutting theirs off. Traditional customs and beliefs are challenged, as China grapples with the immense task of building a new identity in a rapidly changing world. The horrors of the past, the oppression, the corruption, the humiliations at the hands of foreign powers, all contribute to a fervent desire for radical change. However, the birth of the Republic is far from smooth. You immediately see the seeds of future conflict. Yuan Shikai, a military strongman, quickly consolidates power and soon betrays the Republican ideals, attempting to establish himself as emperor. This swift betrayal, a horrifying secret of the new political landscape, plunges China into an era of warlordism, where regional military commanders carve out their own fiefdoms, plunging the country back into chaos. The promise of a strong, unified republic remains elusive. The collapse of the Qing dynasty leaves a monumental vacuum. you are left with the profound question of what China would become without its imperial framework. The horrors of the past, the rigid social hierarchy, the brutal punishments, the intellectual repression, the economic exploitation by foreign powers, and the internal corruption had created a deeply scarred nation, the fall of the empire. Therefore, wasn't just an end, it was a violent beginning, a desperate leap into an uncertain future. The secrets of the Qing's decline became the blueprints for China's tumultuous 20th century. You stand amidst the swirling dust and echoes of a fallen empire, looking back at the profound and often horrifying legacy of the Qing Dynasty. Its collapse didn't just mark the end of a ruling house, it signaled the end of over 2 millennia of imperial rule in China, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's psyche, its politics, and its place in the world. The secrets you've uncovered throughout its rise and fall continue to reverberate, shaping modern China in ways that are still being understood. One of the most immediate and tangible legacies is the territorial integrity of modern China. You recall the vast expansion under the Grand Emperors, Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong, while often achieved through brutal conquest. The Qing's relentless campaigns incorporated Tibet, Mongolia, Xinjiang, and large swaths of the southwest into the Chinese Empire. When the Qing fell, the nascent republic inherited these vast territories. This is a common historical truth. The boundaries of many modern nations are often the direct result of their imperial predecessors. Imagine standing on a map of modern China and tracing its borders. A significant portion of that outline was drawn by Qing ambition, without the Qing. The geopolitical landscape of East Asia today would undoubtedly look vastly different. This legacy, though born of conquest, provided the foundation for a unified, expansive China. However, hand in hand with territorial expansion came the enduring legacy of ethnic tension. You remember the early Qing's brutal enforcement of the queue, the segregation of Manchus, and the inherent racial hierarchy. While the Manchus largely assimilated into Han Chinese culture over centuries, the distinction and the underlying resentment never fully disappeared. The Qing's rule, despite its embrace of Confucianism, always carried the weight of being a foreign dynasty. You might hear modern-day debates among historians about how much of China's current ethnic policies and sensitivities are rooted in the Qing's approach to its diverse subject populations. This lingering tension is one of the more subtle, yet enduring, horrifying secrets of the Qing's rule that, even in its twilight, it fostered divisions that continue to echo. The Qing's economic policies, particularly their resistance to adapting to global trade, left a profound and negative legacy. You recall the Canton system and the refusal to open up to foreign trade, which ultimately led to the Opium Wars. This insular approach, coupled with rampant corruption and the devastating costs of suppressing internal rebellions, left China impoverished and technologically backward by the late 19th century. You can almost feel the weight of this economic stagnation. The missed opportunities. China, once the economic powerhouse of the world, found itself outmaneuvered and exploited by industrializing Western powers. The horrifying secret here is that the Qing's stubborn adherence to tradition, their perceived self-sufficiency, ultimately crippled China's ability to compete in the modern world. Culturally, the Qing's influence is undeniable. If you remember the vast literary projects like the Siku Quanshu and the flourishing of painting, porcelain, and opera. However, you also recall the chilling literary inquisitions under Qianlong, which stifled intellectual freedom and punished dissenting thought. This suppression had a lasting impact, arguably contributing to a conservative intellectual climate that made radical reform more difficult to embrace when it was desperately needed. You might hear modern Chinese scholars discussing how this historical suppression still influences academic discourse and freedom of expression in subtle ways. This curtailment of thought, a hidden horror for future generations. Prevented the free flow of ideas that could have driven necessary change? The Qing's institutional failures, particularly the rampant corruption you witnessed under figures like Haitian, left a deep scar on China's governance. The breakdown of the civil service examination system, the embezzlement of state funds, and the buying and selling of offices all contributed to a pervasive distrust of government that would plague subsequent regimes. You see how this deep-seated corruption continued to be a challenge for the early republic and even later governments. It's a horrifying secret rooted in systemic failure, proving incredibly difficult to eradicate even after the dynasty's fall, perhaps one of the most significant and tragically ironic. Legacies of the Qing is the rise of Chinese nationalism. You recall the humiliations of the Opium Wars, the burning of the Old Summer Palace, and the countless unequal treaties. These events, though inflicted upon the Qing, ignited a fierce sense of national humiliation and a desire for a strong, unified China free from foreign domination. You see how the very weakness of the Qing, its inability to protect China's sovereignty, paradoxically fueled the revolutionary fervor that ultimately overthrew it. This shared experience of suffering under foreign exploitation created a powerful collective identity and a fervent aspiration for national rejuvenation. The horrifying secrets of imperial weakness laid the groundwork for a powerful, often defiant, national consciousness. The Qing's decentralized power structure, particularly the reliance on regional armies to suppress rebellions, inadvertently paved the way for the warlord era that immediately followed the dynasty's collapse. You remember how powerful figures like Yuan Shikai rose to prominence, controlling vast military forces independent of central authority. When the Qing fell, there was no strong, unified national army to maintain order, leading directly to decades of internecine conflict. This unintended consequence of desperately trying to put down internal revolts ultimately created a new form of internal chaos. The horrifying secret is that the Qing's short-term solutions to preserve itself inadvertently sowed the seeds of long-term instability. Ultimately, the Qing dynasty represents a pivotal turning point in Chinese history. It ushered in an era of unprecedented territorial expansion and relative stability for centuries. Yet its inability to adapt to the rapidly changing global landscape led to its agonizing decline and eventual collapse. The horrors you've uncovered, from the brutal consolidation of power to the insidious grip of opium, from the stifling of intellectual dissent to the pervasive corruption and devastating rebellions, are not mere footnotes. They are crucial chapters in the story of how a once mighty empire crumbled, and how its failures directly shaped the tumultuous birth of modern China. The painful lessons learned from the Qing's demise continue to inform China's strategic thinking about national strength, unity, and its place in the world to this very day. You find yourself drifting away from the final, tumultuous moments of the Qing dynasty. Yet the echoes of its rise and fall continue to resonate, the sheer weight of history, the countless lives lived under its dominion, and the profound changes it wrought, settle upon you. As the last vestiges of imperial rule faded, a new, uncertain dawn broke over China. Forever shaped by the horrifying secrets and grand legacies of the Qing, the dynasty's initial conquest, brutal and absolute, established a vast empire that laid the territorial groundwork for modern China. You recall the Manchu banners sweeping across the land, the forced queue, the massacres designed to break resistance. This was a dynasty forged in iron and blood, asserting its power with unwavering ruthlessness. Yet, it also brought centuries of relative peace and prosperity, a golden age under remarkable emperors like Kangxi, Yongzheng, and Qianlong. You remember their patronage of arts, their vast scholarly projects, and their tireless administration for generations. Life under the Qing, while strict, was also stable, a cherished commodity after centuries of chaos preceding their rule. However, beneath the gilded facade of prosperity, the horrifying secrets festered. You witnessed the insidious creep of corruption, from the petty bribes of eunuchs to the staggering wealth amassed by figures like Haitian. This wasn't just about money. It was about a system decaying from within, eroding trust, draining resources, and leaving the empire vulnerable. Then came the opium, an insidious poison introduced by foreign powers which ravaged Chinese society, turning millions into addicts and draining the nation's silver. The Opium Wars, a direct consequence of this devastating trade, shattered China's illusions of superiority and forced it into a series of humiliating, unequal treaties, fundamentally altering its relationship with the outside world. The internal pressures, exacerbated by foreign humiliation, finally erupted in cataclysmic rebellions, most notably the Taiping Rebellion. You remember the sheer scale of the devastation, the tens of millions of lives lost, the vast swaths of land reduced to wasteland. These uprisings, born of desperation and injustice, further weakened the Qing and forced it to rely on regional armies, inadvertently sowing the seeds for the later warlord era. And through it all, you saw the figure of Empress Dowager Dixie, a formidable survivor who clung to power with ruthless determination, resisting radical reform even as she reluctantly embraced some modernization. Her choices, driven by self-preservation, often came at the expense of China's future, a truly horrifying secret for a leader. The final collapse of the Qing in 1912 was not a sudden implosion, but the inevitable culmination of these festering wounds. You remember the young Emperor Puyi's abdication, a symbolic end to an era. The fall left China in a vacuum, struggling to define itself without its imperial moorings. The legacy is complex, a unified territory, a rich cultural heritage, but also deep-seated resentments, a crippling sense of national humiliation, and a cycle of internal conflict that would plague the nascent republic for decades. As you reflect on this long, winding journey through the Qing Dynasty, remember that history is rarely a simple narrative of good versus evil. It's a tapestry woven with threads of ambition and despair, wisdom and folly, progress and decay. The horrifying secrets weren't always hidden in dark corners. Sometimes, they were the very foundations of power, the painful realities of human nature writ large across an empire. The story of the Qing is a reminder that even the most powerful structures can crumble, and that the seeds of destruction are often sown in times of apparent prosperity. Now, as the final echoes of imperial China fade, let your mind drift away from the grandeur and the turmoil, the power and the pain. Allow the complexities of history to gently recede, leaving only a sense of calm and the quiet hum of the night. Sleep now, and let the historical tides carry you to dreams.